My fiancé, Liam, leaned in close, his breath warm against my ear, his hand squeezing my arm. His voice was a low, urgent whisper that cut through the stale air of the lawyer's conference room. "Look at your cousin's briefcase. Don't be obvious. Just look." I glanced over. Jasper was smiling, a slick, predatory expression he probably thought was charming. His briefcase was unlatched. Peeking out was a thick file, and on the tab, I could just make out 2 words: medical evaluation. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just about the money anymore. This had never been just about the money. "They're not trying to cheat you, Zoe," Liam murmured, his words confirming the sickening dread coiling in my stomach. "They're trying to erase you." And that was the moment I finally understood the depths of their betrayal. Before I continue the story, please subscribe. I need to reach 1,000 subscribers so I can keep bringing you stories like this every day. It's just 1 click for you, but it means a lot to me. To understand how I ended up in a polished mahogany death trap of a conference room, you have to understand my family. Or rather, the family, as they like to call themselves, as if they were some storied dynasty instead of a collection of emotionally stunted adults who had mastered the art of failing upwards. For my entire life, I was the designated grown-up, the fixer, the one who smoothed things over. I was Zoe, the reliable one, the one you called when you needed bail money at 3 a.m. or when you forgot to pay your rent for the 3rd month in a row. I had a history of swallowing my own needs to keep the peace, a peace that was always, always temporary and transactional. My family's love was conditional, based entirely on what I could provide. My mother's side of the family, the Blackwoods, were a special breed of toxic. They were ruled by my Aunt Carol and her husband, Uncle Robert, a pair of social climbers who saw their family name as a birthright to be monetized. Their son, Jasper, was the golden child, a walking personification of entitlement, who had never worked an honest day in his life. They treated the idea of family like a business, and I was the perpetually underperforming, non-voting shareholder they were forced to tolerate. This dynamic was cemented by my grandfather, Atticus Blackwood, the family patriarch and the source of all its wealth. He was a brilliant, eccentric, and deeply discerning man who saw his children and grandchildren for exactly what they were. He and I had a quiet understanding. While the others flitted around him with fake praise, I just talked to him. We discussed books, history, the migratory patterns of birds. He never said it out loud, but I knew he saw me differently. When he passed away, the family's grief was performative and brief, quickly replaced by a buzzing anticipation. They were vultures circling a freshly deceased buffalo. They assumed the fortune would go to them, with Jasper, of course, getting the lion's share. They had it all planned out. I was expected to show up to the will reading, look appropriately somber, and then fade back into my role as the family ATM. The day of the will reading was a masterclass in passive aggression. Aunt Carol wore a black dress that was just a little too fashionable for mourning, her face a carefully constructed mask of sorrow. Jasper kept patting my arm and saying things like, "Don't you worry, Zoe. We'll make sure you're taken care of." It was the kind of statement that sounds kind on the surface, but is really a declaration of power. He was telling me that my future was in his hands. Liam, my fiancé, and the only truly sane person in my life, stood beside me, a quiet pillar of support. He saw them for what they were from the moment he met them. He once described a family dinner as being the designated driver at a demolition derby. The lawyer, a stoic man named Mr. Albright, who had worked for my grandfather for 40 years, finally cleared his throat and began to read. The air was thick with greed. You could practically smell it. The will started with the usual small bequests: his collection of antique maps to a museum, a generous donation to the local library. Then came the bombshell. Mr. Albright looked up over his spectacles and took a deep breath. "To my children, Carol and Robert, and my grandson Jasper, who have consistently shown more interest in my net worth than my well-being, I leave the sum of $1 each, so they cannot contest that they were forgotten." A collective gasp sucked the air out of the room. Aunt Carol's mask of grief shattered, replaced by a contorted sneer of pure rage. Jasper just stared, his mouth hanging open. But my grandfather wasn't done. The lawyer continued. "All the rest, residue, and remainder of my estate, including all properties, assets, and controlling shares in Blackwood Industries, I leave to my beloved granddaughter, Zoe, who has shown me kindness without expectation and has a strength she does not yet realize she possesses. I felt the blood drain from my face. Every eye in the room swiveled to me. It wasn't a friendly gaze. It was the look of a pack of wolves, realizing the sheep they'd been tormenting had just been handed the deed to the entire forest. The silence that followed the announcement was heavier than any sound. It was a dense, suffocating blanket of shock and fury. I couldn't process it. Me? Inherit everything? It felt like a dream, or more accurately, a prank. My family operated on a very specific, unwritten set of rules, and rule number 1 was that Zoe doesn't win. Aunt Carol was the first to speak, her voice a low hiss. This is absurd. He was senile. Clearly, he was not of sound mind. Jasper, recovering from his initial shock, quickly jumped in. Zoe, you have to admit this is strange. Grandfather was old. He could be easily influenced. The gaslighting began immediately. They weren't angry, you see. They were concerned. Concerned for me. Concerned for the family legacy. Concerned that poor, simple Zoe was being put in a position she couldn't possibly handle. It was their classic move. Frame their selfish outrage as noble anxiety. Liam's hand found mine under the table. His steady presence was the only thing keeping me from either bursting into tears or hysterical laughter. He was my anchor in this sea of manufactured drama. Before I could even form a response, Mr. Albright cleared his throat again, a dry, deliberate sound that cut through their rising hysteria. Atticus anticipated this reaction, he said, his gaze sweeping over Carol and Jasper, which is why he included a final provision, a fail-safe, if you will. He explained that to finalize the inheritance, I had to complete something Atticus had designed himself. He called it the Blackwood Gauntlet. It was a series of 3 tests, designed to prove the heir was worthy not just in blood, but in character. The family's mood shifted instantly from outrage to predatory glee. A challenge, a series of tests. This was a language they understood. This was a game they could win. They saw it as a loophole, a chance to prove I was unfit and wrestle control back from the brink. Jasper's slick smile returned. A gauntlet, he said, leaning back in his chair. How very theatrical. Well, we'll be there to support you every step of the way, Zoe, as a family. I heard the unspoken threat loud and clear. Their support would be sabotage. Their help would be a hindrance. They weren't going to let $10 billion slip through their fingers without a fight. The gauntlet wasn't just a test for me anymore. It was their new battlefield. The first test was delivered a week later in a wax-sealed envelope. It was a riddle, pure Atticus. It spoke of a memory that holds no image, and a voice that never spoke, hidden in a place where time stands still but is never the same. My family immediately descended on Blackwood Manor, the sprawling estate I now technically owned, under the guise of helping me. It was a transparent ploy to keep an eye on me and, I suspected, to find a way to solve the riddle first. Jasper, with his business degree and inflated sense of self, immediately declared it was a financial puzzle hidden in old ledgers. He and his father locked themselves in the study, poring over documents with a frantic energy. Aunt Carol decided it must be something sentimental, a hidden love letter perhaps. She began tearing through old photo albums and closets, her search more like a raid than a gentle stroll down memory lane. They were so predictable. They saw the world through the lens of their own obsessions, money and gossip. They never considered that my grandfather's mind worked on a different plane. For 2 days, they scurried around the manor like panicked rats, growing increasingly frustrated. They'd corner me and offer helpful suggestions. Have you checked the wine cellar, Zoe? Perhaps it's a vintage bottle, Jasper would say, his eyes gleaming with the thought of the valuable collection. I'm sure it's in your grandmother's old jewellery box, Carol would insist. It was all misdirection, designed to send me on wild goose chases while they pursued their own theories. I let them. I wandered the halls, feigning confusion. I played the part of the overwhelmed, undeserving heiress they believed me to be. Liam was my sounding board. At night, We'd sit in the massive kitchen, the only room that felt remotely normal, and talk. "They're not even trying to solve your grandfather's riddle," he said, sipping his tea. "They're trying to solve their own. They think he was just a richer version of them." He was right. That was their fatal flaw. They couldn't imagine a motive beyond greed or sentimentality. But I knew my grandfather. His riddles were about perspective. While the family was busy trying to brute force the riddle, I spent my time walking the grounds. My grandfather and I used to take long walks through the gardens he had meticulously cultivated over 50 years. He knew every plant, every stone, every shift in the light. He called it his living clock. That's when it clicked. A place where time stands still but is never the same. The sundial. It was a massive, ornate bronze sundial in the centre of the rose garden. Time was marked by the shadow, so it was always changing, yet the object itself was stationary. It was the perfect Atticus-style answer, elegant and simple, hidden in plain sight. I didn't tell anyone. I waited until dawn the next morning, the one time I knew I'd be alone. The family were not early risers, unless money was being counted. I went to the sundial, the cool morning dew soaking my shoes. The riddle mentioned a voice that never spoke. I ran my hands over the bronze Roman numerals, feeling for any incongruity. At the base of the gnomon, the part that cast the shadow, I felt it. A tiny, almost imperceptible seam. It wasn't a button or a switch. It was a pressure plate. I pushed. With a soft click, a small, shallow drawer slid out from the pedestal. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, was not a key or a note, but a single, antique pocket watch. This was the memory that holds no image. A watch holds time, the ultimate memory, but shows no pictures. I picked it up. It was heavy, cool, and silent. It wasn't ticking. As I stood there, holding the watch, Jasper appeared from the path. His hair was a mess, and he was still in his pajamas. He must have seen me from his window. His eyes locked onto the watch in my hand, and his face curdled with an ugly mix of envy and disbelief. "What is that?" he demanded, his voice raspy. "How did you find that?" I just looked at him, then at the watch. I was starting to understand the gauntlet. It wasn't about being clever. It was about knowing the man they had all taken for granted. For the first time, I didn't feel overwhelmed. I felt a spark of something else. Power. The second test arrived 2 days after my sundial discovery. This time, the instructions were delivered by Mr. Albright in person. He handed me a simple, laminated card. It read, "Follow the fallen star to the heart of the woods. What is broken must be made whole." Along with the card, he gave me a locked, heavy-duty pelican case. "Your grandfather specified this is to be opened only at the destination," he said, his face impassive. "And he specified that you must undertake this task alone. Alone." That one word sent a jolt of panic through me, and a wave of relief through my family. Aunt Carol's face lit up. "Of course. A challenge of self-reliance. Zoe, you're so independent." "You'll be fine." Jasper, however, looked like a wolf who had just been told the sheep he was hunting was being delivered directly to his den, no fences involved. The fallen star was a local landmark, a small, oddly shaped meteorite that had landed on Blackwood property a century ago. It was the starting point of a notoriously difficult hiking trail that wound deep into the 1,000-acre woods behind the manor. The heart of the woods was a treacherous, marshy area, a good 5 miles in. It was not a friendly walk in the park. It was a place where you could easily get lost, or worse. Their plan became sickeningly clear. They couldn't legally join me, but no one could stop them from, coincidentally, being in the same woods. They would follow me, wait for their moment, and ensure that whatever was broken remained that way. They'd make it look like an accident, like I was in over my head, just as they'd always claimed. Liam was beside himself with worry. "You can't go alone, Zoe. It's not safe. They will do something." I knew he was right, but I also knew that backing down was not an option. This was part of the test. My grandfather must have known they would try something like this. The test wasn't just about the hike. It was about surviving my family. So, we made our own plan. I would go, and I would follow the rules. But Liam, a former search and rescue volunteer, would be my shadow. He would track me from a distance, unseen, unheard, a guardian angel in hiking boots. It felt like a deception, but what choice did I have? My family had spent a lifetime using the guise of love to manipulate me. I would use the pretense of solitude to protect myself. I set out the next morning at sunrise, the heavy case banging against my leg. The air was crisp, and the woods were initially beautiful, but the beauty was tainted by a constant sense of being watched. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves, sent a spike of adrenaline through me. I didn't have to look back to know they were there. Jasper, probably. He fancied himself an outdoorsman, which in reality meant he owned a lot of expensive gear he barely knew how to use. I focused on the trail, on the rhythm of my own breathing. The path grew more difficult, climbing over moss-covered rocks and dipping into muddy gullies. After about 2 hours, I reached the meteorite, a strange, pockmarked hunk of iron ore embedded in the earth. From there, the trail markers became less frequent. This was where the real test began. I pushed deeper into the woods, the canopy thickening overhead, plunging the path into a perpetual twilight. The air grew damp and heavy with the smell of wet earth and decay. This was the marsh. I found the landmark my grandfather had described in his old journals, a cluster of 3 ancient lightning-scarred oak trees. At their base was a stone pedestal, and on it, a shattered porcelain bowl. It was beautiful, or it had been. Now it was in a dozen pieces. This was what I had to make whole. I unlatched the pelican case. Inside was not glue or kintsugi repair supplies as I might have expected. It was a set of delicate tools, tweezers, brushes, dental picks, and a small, leather-bound book. The book was a field guide, not to plants or animals, but to a specific type of phosphorescent moss that grew only in the deepest, dampest parts of this marsh. The instructions were clear. I was to find the moss, grind it into a paste, and use its natural adhesive properties to mend the bowl. By nightfall, the repaired cracks would glow in the dark. It was a task that required patience, precision, and a deep knowledge of the natural world. It was quintessential Atticus. And it was then that Jasper decided to make his move. He stepped out from behind a tree, a smug look on his face. "Having trouble, cousin?" he asked, his voice echoing unnaturally in the quiet marsh. "Looks like a job for someone with a steadier hand." He started walking towards me, a little too quickly, his eyes fixed on the porcelain shards, and I knew, with absolute certainty, that he wasn't there to help. Jasper's approach was meant to be intimidating. He was taller, stronger, and in his mind, superior in every way. He saw me as a damsel in distress, a role I had been cast in my whole life. "Look, Zoe," he said, his voice dripping with condescending pity. "This is clearly too much for you. Why don't you let me handle it? I'll even tell Mr. Albright it was your idea. We can share the credit." He was offering me a deal, one where he did the work and ultimately took control. It was the family way. But I wasn't the same person who would have gratefully stepped aside just a few weeks ago. I had found the watch. I had solved the first riddle. I had a sliver of my grandfather's strength inside me now. I held up a hand. "I've got it, Jasper." The instructions were clear. "I have to do it alone." His smile tightened. "Don't be difficult. I'm just trying to help the family. This inheritance is too important to risk on a hobby project." He lunged for the largest piece of the bowl. It wasn't a friendly gesture. It was a grab. And in that moment, all the years of suppressed frustration, of being pushed aside and undervalued, coalesced into a single, sharp point of anger. I did something I had never done before. I didn't move. I didn't flinch. I just said, "No." It was a quiet word, but it hung in the air between us, as solid as a wall. He was so surprised that he actually froze, his hand hovering over the stone pedestal. He had never heard that word from me before. "What did you say?" "I said no," I repeated, my voice stronger this time, firmer. "You are not touching this. You are not part of this test. You need to leave." He stared at me, his brain seeming to short-circuit. He was so used to me being a doormat that the concept of a spine was completely foreign to him. He tried to recover with a sneer. "You're being dramatic, Zoe. Just let me." He reached again, and this time, I was ready. I didn't push him or yell. I simply picked up the heavy pelican case and placed it squarely on top of the porcelain shards. A shield. His path was blocked. His eyes narrowed into slits. The fake charm vanished, replaced by the raw, ugly entitlement that was his true nature. "You will regret this," he hissed, and then he turned and stormed back into the woods. The threat was real, I knew that. But as I watched him go, I didn't feel scared. I felt a profound sense of release. The first boundary had been set. It was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. After Jasper's hasty and angry departure, the woods felt different. The oppressive sense of being watched was gone, replaced by a quiet solitude. The silence was my own now, not a curtain for someone else's malice. I opened the field guide. The moss I needed was called Noctiluca silva, or forest light. According to my grandfather's detailed notes and drawings, it grew on the north side of fallen birch trees, but only in areas that never received direct sunlight. The task was a treasure hunt. I spent the next few hours carefully navigating the marsh, my boots sinking into the soft ground. It was slow, methodical work. I found a fallen birch, then another, but it was only on the third one, tucked away in a deep, damp hollow, that I found it. It was a patch of pale, almost white moss, unremarkable in the dim light. But when I cupped my hands over it, blocking the faint ambient light, it emitted a soft, ethereal green glow. It was magical. I carefully harvested a small amount, just as the book instructed, and returned to the pedestal. The next phase was all about patience. I had to grind the moss with a bit of sap from a pine tree to create a paste. My hands, usually steady, felt clumsy. I was acutely aware of the setting sun. The light was fading fast, the woods transitioning from twilight to true dark. The air grew colder. For a moment, doubt crept in. What if I couldn't do it? What if Jasper was right? What if I failed? I thought of Liam, out there somewhere, trusting me. I thought of my grandfather, who had designed this beautiful, intricate test, trusting me. And I thought of Jasper, who had trusted only in my weakness. That was the thought that solidified my resolve. I would not prove him right. I worked carefully, applying the glowing paste to the edges of the broken porcelain. Piece by piece, the bowl began to take shape. It was not perfect. The cracks were visible, a web of faint green lines. But it was whole. As the last sliver of daylight vanished, the effect my grandfather had intended became clear. In the pitch-black darkness of the woods, the bowl looked like a celestial sphere. The cracks were not imperfections. They were constellations. It was breathtaking. I had done it. I had taken something broken and made it whole again, not by erasing the damage, but by illuminating it. I sat there for a long time, just looking at it, the only point of light in a world of darkness. I felt a profound sense of peace. For the first time, I felt worthy, not of the money, but of my grandfather's faith in me. The walk back was a completely different experience. With the glowing bowl lighting my way like a lantern, I felt no fear. The woods were no longer a threat. They were a sanctuary. When I finally emerged from the tree line, I saw a single figure waiting for me. It was Liam. He hadn't needed to intervene, but he had stayed, a silent guardian. The look on his face when he saw me, tired and muddy but holding the glowing bowl, was worth more than the entire Blackwood fortune. He didn't say, "I told you so," or "I was worried." He just smiled and said, "I knew you could do it." We walked back to the manor in a comfortable silence. The lights were on, of course. My family was waiting up, not out of concern for my well-being, but for a report on my failure. When I walked into the grand library, carrying the softly glowing bowl, their faces were a picture. Aunt Carol's jaw dropped. Uncle Robert looked confused. And Jasper looked murderous. His plan had failed, and my success was a direct rebuke to his attempt at sabotage. Well, well, Aunt Carol said, recovering quickly. How creative. I suppose that's one way to do it. The sarcasm was thick enough to cut with a knife. It was grandfather's way, I said simply, placing the bowl on the mantelpiece. It pulsed with a soft green light, a quiet testament to my victory. Jasper couldn't stand it. You got lucky, he snapped. Anyone could have stuck some glowing weeds on a broken pot. But they didn't, did they? I replied, my voice even. I did. Alone. I let that hang in the air. I knew he wouldn't confess to being there, to trying to interfere. That would be admitting weakness, admitting he had failed to intimidate me. So he just stood there, fuming. The power dynamic in the room had shifted, and everyone felt it. I was no longer the family doormat. I was a player in the game, and I had just won the second round. That night, I found a small, leather-bound journal on my pillow. It was my grandfather's. There was no note. I knew it must have been left there by Mr. Albright. I opened it, and on the first page, in Atticus's familiar scrawl, it said, "For Zoe, because you see the world as it is, not just as it benefits you. The final test will prove it." Reading his words, I felt a surge of validation that was so powerful it almost brought me to tears. He had known. All this time, he had seen me. And he had laid out this entire path not just to give me an inheritance, but to give me back to myself. The final test was, in many ways, the simplest and the most complex. There was no riddle to solve, no physical trial to endure. The instruction, delivered once again by the stoic Mr. Albright, was a single sentence. Decide what to do with it all. That was it. I had 1 week to present my plan for the Blackwood estate and fortune to the Board of Trustees, which consisted of Mr. Albright, a High Court judge, and the dean of the local university. My family, of course, saw this as their final, glorious opportunity. They could no longer sabotage a physical task, so they shifted their strategy to psychological warfare. Their new plan was to guide me, to advise me, to manipulate me into a decision that would ultimately put them in control. The campaign started at breakfast the next day. "Zoe, darling," Aunt Carol began, her voice syrupy sweet. "We've been thinking. This is such a tremendous responsibility. You're an artist, a free spirit. You don't want to be bogged down with board meetings and stock portfolios." "Your aunt is right," Uncle Robert chimed in, folding his newspaper with an air of great authority. "The smartest move would be to establish a family trust. We could manage it for you. You'd get a generous stipend, of course. No more worries for the rest of your life." It was so transparent it was almost laughable. They were offering to take my $10 billion inheritance off my hands in exchange for pocket money. Jasper's approach was different. He tried to appeal to my ego, or what he assumed was my ego. "We could be a team, Zoe," he said, cornering me in the garden. "You and me. Think of the power we'd have. The Blackwood name would be bigger than ever. We could double the fortune in 10 years. He was trying to tempt me with the very things he valued, money and power. It was like trying to tempt a vegetarian with a steak. They just didn't get it. They couldn't comprehend that their definition of a successful life, one filled with greed, status, and control, was my definition of a prison. Their attempts to help were relentless. They left financial reports on my desk. They invited investment bankers to dinner. They talked endlessly about stocks, acquisitions, and offshore accounts. It was a full court press of psychological manipulation, designed to make me feel small, ignorant, and incapable. They wanted me to doubt myself so much that I would have no choice but to hand everything over to them. During that week of intense family pressure, my grandfather's journal was my shield and my guide. I read it every night, absorbing his words, his thoughts, his philosophy. He wrote about the responsibility of wealth, calling it a heavy cloak that could either suffocate you or be tailored into a tool for good. He wrote about my family with a sad, clinical detachment. "They see the world as a pie," he wrote, "and they believe the only way to get a bigger slice is to take from others. They do not understand that it is possible to bake more pies." That metaphor struck me deeply. It was the core of their being. They operated from a place of scarcity, terrified someone else might get something they deserved. But the most important thing I found was a section near the end, written just a few months before he died. He laid out his true fears for the company he had built and the fortune he had amassed. He was terrified it would become a monument to greed, a tool for the powerful to crush the powerless. He wrote about projects he'd always dreamed of: funding, a foundation for aspiring artists from low-income backgrounds, a massive land trust to rewild depleted forests, a tech incubator for environmental innovations. These weren't just ideas. He had detailed plans, budgets, and potential partners. He hadn't left these plans to his children because he knew they would liquidate them for cash. He hadn't put them in the will because he didn't want to force his heir into a path they didn't believe in. He left it as a choice. He was testing me, not on my business acumen, but on my vision. Would I see the fortune as a hoard to be protected, as my family did? Or would I see it as fuel for a legacy of creation and compassion? The answer was so clear, it felt like it had been inside me all along. I wasn't just the heir to his money. I was the heir to his values. Liam, as always, was my rock. He listened as I read passages from the journal aloud. He never told me what to do, but he asked the right questions. What feels right to you? What do you think he would be most proud of? He helped me see that this wasn't about choosing between myself and my family. It was about choosing my grandfather's vision over theirs. The final presentation was not going to be what they expected at all. The day of the presentation arrived. The meeting was set for 2 p.m. in the main conference room of the Blackwood Industries headquarters downtown. My family insisted on driving with me. To show a united front, Aunt Carol said. It was a car ride from hell. They gave me a last-minute pep talk that was really a string of veiled threats and manipulative pleas. Just remember who your family is, Zoe, Uncle Robert said, staring at me in the rearview mirror. Don't be rash. A trust is the most logical option. Jasper, sitting beside me, tried a different tactic. If you announce me as COO, the board will be thrilled. It shows continuity. It shows strength. We can release the statement this afternoon. They were still convinced they could control the outcome. They genuinely believed that after a lifetime of yielding, I would simply fold under pressure. Their lack of self-awareness was staggering. They had shown me their true colours time and time again, and yet they still expected me to trust them. We arrived at the gleaming office tower. As we walked into the boardroom, I saw the 3 trustees at the long mahogany table. Mr. Albright gave me a small, encouraging nod, and then I saw it. Sitting next to my family's lawyer was a man in a crisp suit I didn't recognise. He had a leather satchel at his feet. My family greeted him with familiar smiles. This was their ace in the hole. This was their final trap. Liam, who had insisted on coming as my fiancé and moral support, saw him at the same time I did. He leaned in close, and that's when he whispered those fateful words. "Look at your cousin's briefcase. Don't be obvious. Just look." I glanced over. Jasper's briefcase was unlatched, and there it was, the file. Medical evaluation. It all clicked into place with a sickening thud. Their plan was diabolical. They would let me give my presentation. Then, no matter what I said, they would stand up and express their grave concerns for my mental state. The strange gauntlet, my obsession with nature, my erratic behaviour in the woods. They had twisted everything to build a narrative that I was unstable. The man in the suit was a psychiatrist they had hired, ready to testify. They were going to have me declared medically incompetent to manage my own affairs. They weren't just trying to stop me from inheriting. They were trying to have me legally erased. For a second, the world tilted. The air in the room felt thin, hard to breathe. The smiling faces of my aunt, uncle, and cousin seemed to warp into grotesque masks. They were going to strip me of my rights, my freedom, my identity, all for money. A quiet, cold fury settled over me. It wasn't the hot, explosive anger of our confrontation in the woods. This was a deep, glacial rage. The kind that clarifies everything. All the years of being their emotional punching bag, their emergency fund, their secret keeper, it all led to this. To them, trying to put me in a cage, figurative, or perhaps even literal. Mr. Albright called the meeting to order. "Zoe, we are ready for your proposal." All eyes turned to me. Jasper had a smug, confident look on his face. He thought he had already won. He thought I was about to walk straight into his ambush. I took a deep breath. I looked at my aunt, my uncle, my cousin. I saw the greed, the entitlement, the absolute certainty in their eyes, and I felt nothing but a profound, sorrowful pity for them. Their lives were so small, so consumed by this one ugly thing. Then I looked at Liam. His eyes were steady, full of trust. He was my anchor. I stood up and placed my grandfather's journal on the table. "Thank you all for being here," I began, my voice clear and steady, betraying none of the turmoil inside me. "I have given the future of the Blackwood estate a great deal of thought. My family has been very helpful in offering their advice." I paused, letting my eyes drift over them. Aunt Carol beamed, a sickeningly false expression of pride. "They have suggested I create a family trust, managed by them, to alleviate the burden from my shoulders. They have also suggested I appoint my cousin Jasper as COO of Blackwood Industries." I let that hang in the air. Jasper sat up a little straighter, a preemptive smirk on his lips. He was getting ready for his victory speech. He was about to be very disappointed. "However," I continued, my voice gaining strength, "I will not be doing any of that." The shift in the room was immediate. The smiles on my family's faces froze and then melted away. Jasper's smirk vanished. My grandfather did not leave me his fortune as a burden. He left it to me as a choice. He didn't want his legacy to be about hoarding wealth. He wanted it to be about creating opportunities. I opened his journal. "My proposal is not to manage the Blackwood fortune as it is, but to transform it. I am proposing the complete dissolution of the Blackwood family office as a wealth management entity. Instead, we will be forming the Atticus Blackwood Foundation." I then laid out the 3 core initiatives my grandfather had dreamed of: the Arts Scholarship for underprivileged youth, the Land Trust for rewilding and conservation, the Tech Incubator for green energy solutions. I had spent the last 2 days with Liam, flushing out the plans, creating budgets, and identifying potential board members who were experts in their fields. It was a comprehensive, professional, and visionary proposal. The trustees were captivated. The judge was nodding slowly. The dean looked thrilled. Mr. Albright was beaming. My family, however, looked like they had been physically struck. This was their worst nightmare. I wasn't just refusing to give them the money. I was planning to give it all away, to causes they considered frivolous and useless. But I wasn't done. I saved the best for last. I turned my attention directly to my family. "I understand," I said, my voice now laced with cold iron, "that my family may have concerns about my ability to lead such a project. They may feel that my recent behavior has been erratic." I looked directly at Jasper, and then at the strange man in the suit. They may have even gone so far as to hire a medical professional to question my competency here today. The psychiatrist, Dr. Alistair Finch, had the decency to look horrified. He was clearly a reputable man who had been fed a pack of lies. My aunt and uncle shrank in their chairs, but Jasper, ever arrogant, tried to bluff his way through. "This is ridiculous. We are concerned, yes. This proves our point. Giving everything away is insane." "Is it?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. "Or is the insane thing to try and have your own family member committed because she won't give you her inheritance?" I looked at the trustees. My grandfather knew this might happen. He knew their character. The gauntlet wasn't just a test for me. It was a stage for them. And they have performed exactly as he predicted. I then calmly, and with brutal precision, recounted every act of sabotage and manipulation. I spoke of Jasper's attempt to misdirect me during the first test. I described his appearance in the woods, his threats, and his attempt to interfere with the second test, a direct violation of the rules. I talked about the constant gaslighting, the emotional manipulation, the relentless pressure campaign this past week. Every word was true, and every word landed like a hammer blow. Uncle Robert was bright red, sputtering, unable to form a coherent sentence. Aunt Carol looked like she was about to faint. Their entire plan had not just failed. It had been turned inside out and used as evidence against them. Dr. Finch, the psychiatrist, stood up abruptly. "I believe I have been brought here under false pretenses," he said, his voice ringing with professional indignation. He looked at my family with utter contempt. "My purpose is to help people, not to be used as a weapon in a financial dispute. I will be reporting this to my ethics board. And for the record," he added, looking at me, "Ms. Blackwood seems to be the most mentally sound person in this room." He then picked up his satchel and walked out of the room without a backward glance. It was a stunning public rebuke. The foundation of their plot had just walked out the door and threatened to report them. Jasper, for the first time in his life, looked truly defeated. The fight was gone. There was nothing left but the pathetic, hollowed-out shell of his own greed. Mr. Albright cleared his throat. "Well," he said with profound understatement, "this has been illuminating." The judge and the dean both nodded in agreement. The decision was already made. The gauntlet was over, and I had won. The aftermath was swift and decisive. The trustees voted unanimously to approve my proposal for the Atticus Blackwood Foundation. The legal gears, which my family had hoped to use against me, now turned in my favour. Mr. Albright, with a certain grim satisfaction, handled the details. The $1 bequests to Carol, Robert, and Jasper were formally processed. I believe Mr. Albright even had the cheques framed. My family did not take their defeat gracefully. They tried to contest the outcome, of course. They filed lawsuits, claimed coercion, duress, everything they could think of. But their credibility was shot. Dr. Esso, Finch's testimony to the ethics board, combined with Mr. Albright's meticulous records of their behaviour during the gauntlet, meant their legal challenges were dismissed as frivolous and malicious. Their own lawyer dropped them. They had overplayed their hand so dramatically that they had become pariahs. The social status they had worshipped their entire lives evaporated overnight. No one wanted to be associated with the greedy, manipulative family who had tried to have their own daughter and niece institutionalized for money. They were a scandal, a punchline in the very circles they had tried so desperately to dominate. Jasper's fate was the most ironic. In his desperation, he had done some legally questionable things while trying to dig up dirt on me, including attempting to bribe a hospital clerk for my medical records. The clerk reported him. 5 hours after that disastrous board meeting, he was arrested. The charge was conspiracy to commit fraud. It turned out that trying to erase someone has actual legal consequences. Who knew? For my part, I wanted nothing more to do with them. I had the locks at Blackwood Manor changed. I instructed Mr. Albright that all future communication was to go through him. The boundary I had set in the woods was now 1,000 miles wide and fortified with lawyers. I was finally, truly free of them. There was no dramatic final confrontation, no tearful apology from them. There was just silence. They had faded from my life, not with a bang, but with the pathetic whimper of their own defeated greed. The months that followed were a whirlwind of purposeful activity. Dismantling the old corporate structure and building the foundation from the ground up was an immense task, but it was the most fulfilling work of my life. I wasn't just managing money, I was building a legacy my grandfather would have been proud of. Blackwood Manor, once a stuffy museum of wealth, was transformed. We turned the East Wing into a residence for the Artists in Residence program. The grand ballroom became a gallery space for their work. The sprawling grounds, once a symbol of private excess, were now part of the Conservation Land Trust, with public hiking trails and educational programs. The heart of the woods, where I had repaired that broken bowl, was now the centerpiece of a protected wetland sanctuary. I kept the glowing bowl on the mantel in my new, smaller office. It served as a constant reminder that broken things can be made beautiful again, not by hiding the cracks, but by making them shine. Liam and I were a team in every sense of the word. His grounding presence and strategic mind were invaluable. But more than that, he was the person who had seen my strength before I saw it in myself. He had validated my reality when my family was trying to gaslight me into insanity. Our wedding was a quiet affair, held in the rose garden by the sundial. Our friends were there, the new board of the foundation, and Mr. Albright, who walked me down the aisle. It was a day filled with genuine joy, not performance. I never heard from my aunt or uncle directly. I heard through the grapevine that they had to sell their house and downsize significantly. They were consumed with paying Jasper's legal fees. Jasper, after a lengthy and humiliating trial, was convicted. He received a sentence of community service and probation, but his reputation was destroyed forever. The golden child had tarnished himself beyond repair. Sometimes I wondered if they ever felt remorse. But I knew better. People like them don't feel remorse, they feel resentment. They would forever see me as the villain who had stolen what was rightfully theirs, never understanding that they were the architects of their own downfall. My new life is quieter, richer in ways that have nothing to do with money. I spend my days meeting with artists, ecologists, and inventors. I see the direct impact of my grandfather's legacy every single day. I see a young painter, who grew up in a homeless shelter, have her first solo show. I see a team of scientists, funded by our incubator, develop a new method for cleaning microplastics from the ocean. I see school children on a field trip, their faces full of wonder as they learn about the phosphorescent moss in the wetland sanctuary. It's a wealth my family could never comprehend. Their world was built on exclusion, on having more than others. My world is now built on inclusion, on creating more for everyone. It's the difference between building walls and opening doors. Every so often, I'll see a picture of them in a gossip blog, looking haggard and bitter at some low-tier charity event, desperately trying to cling to the social relevance they've lost. There's a stark contrast between their pinched, angry faces and the photos of me, covered in mud, planting trees with a group of volunteers. They are trapped in the prison of their own bitterness, while I have found freedom in purpose. I realised the gauntlet was never about the money. Atticus didn't care if I kept the fortune or gave it away. The gauntlet was a crucible designed to do one thing: to burn away the part of me that had always put my family's toxic needs before my own well-being. It was designed to force me to build boundaries, to find my voice, to claim my own power. The inheritance wasn't the billions of dollars. It was the person I became in the process of defending it. He didn't just leave me his estate. He led me back to myself. The ultimate vindication isn't in their downfall, but in my own quiet, happy, and meaningful life. I am finally whole. Not because I have everything, but because I am finally free. So now, my life is divided into a clear before and after. The before was a long grey period of accommodation, of making myself smaller to fit into the cramped, toxic box my family had built for me. I was the fixer, the peacekeeper, the reliable one, which was just their code for the doormat. My own dreams, my own needs, were always secondary to their endless, manufactured crises. They defined my worth by my utility to them. Love was a transaction, and I was always overpaying. The after is a life lived in full colour. It's a life defined by the boundaries I fought so hard to build. It's waking up in the morning knowing that my day belongs to me and the purpose I've chosen, not to a frantic phone call about someone else's bad decisions. It's the quiet confidence that comes from surviving a battle you never thought you could win. Liam and I often talk about what might have happened if I hadn't seen that file in Jasper's briefcase. What if their trap had worked? It's a chilling thought, a ghost of a life that almost was, but dwelling on it is pointless. What matters is what did happen. They revealed their true selves, and in doing so, they gave me the greatest gift they ever could have: a clean break. The rage I felt in that boardroom has long since faded, replaced by a calm, steady sense of peace. I don't hate them. I don't think about them at all, and that, I think, is the truest form of freedom. They no longer take up any space in my head. The Blackwood name is no longer associated with corporate greed and social climbing. It's associated with art, nature, and innovation. That is the ultimate reversal. They wanted to control the legacy, and in trying to steal it, they lost it completely, while I, the outsider, got to redefine it. I honoured my grandfather's true wishes, and more importantly, I learned to honour my own. So I have to ask, I set my boundaries, I exposed their plot, and I walked away, leaving them to face the consequences of their own actions. Did I go too far, or not far enough?